Hey, and we're back with Greg Everett, founder and head coach of Catalyst Athletics, Olympic Weightlifting in Sunnyvale, California, author of Olympic Weightlifting, a guide for athletes, as well as director and producer of new movie American Weightlifting. Welcome aboard, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, quick question to start off. What do you think about the state of weightlifting in the United States before we get to the movie itself?
I think that one of the things that I found actually in the 4 years that I was making the movie is that I've come out the other end a lot more optimistic than I was going into it. And so I think that obviously part of the movie is discussing kind of the troubles that we're facing, the struggles of the sport. But I think part of what it did was really highlight the passion and the dedication of so many people to the sport, which is why it's continuing. And so I think that while obviously we're struggling, the World Championships just ended, and our women's team took 7th overall in the world. The men's team, I believe, was 10th or 12th. So, all things considered, that's actually not that bad. It's not as bleak as a lot of times I think we feel it is. And so I really believe that we've got a bit of steam built up, and I think that we're starting to generate some more momentum. So I think things are really looking up.
How long have you been in the sport, Greg?
7 or 8 years or so, depending on where you start counting. I learned the lifts in high school, so that's a shockingly long time ago actually now. And but I didn't have access to a coach or to a facility where I could really train it until a little bit later in life, unfortunately. And I think had I had those opportunities, I probably would have jumped headfirst into it much earlier. So I think that the landscape now is a lot better for kids who are in my situation.
So picking up on what you just said around the recent performances of the U.S. team, the national team, why are you optimistic based on the length of time you've seen in the sport?
Well, there's obviously a lot of factors. There's the internet, there's CrossFit, there's new coaches, all these different things. So part of it is the accessibility, right? When I was 15 years old, if you couldn't find it in a magazine or it wasn't at your high school, it basically didn't exist, right? You couldn't go and type into a browser, how do I become a weightlifter? So as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old these days, it's very easy to find that path, right? It's easy to find information, even if you can't necessarily find a coach or a team, and it's easy to kind of get headed in that direction. Whereas, like I said prior, there's these tiny little pockets of weightlifting, right? If you happen to grow up near a weightlifting coach, perfect, right? You could be part of this great team. You could have this opportunity to become a great weightlifter. If you didn't, you probably never heard of it. And so that's. I'd say I graduated in high school in 1998, and so between then and now, obviously the internet has made great leaps and bounds. And then in the last, let's see here, since 2004, 2003, when I first got involved with CrossFit, obviously that has grown by leaps and bounds, and so that has, incidentally, not intentionally, of course, really increased the exposure of people to the Olympic lifts. It's indirect in a lot of ways, but it has, people now just know this thing exists. And the biggest thing that we're missing is participation, especially among young kids. And so the more people that are doing it, the better. Whether, we don't need more super high-end athletes right now. We need more people, period. And the greater that foundation, that base is, if we have 500,000 people doing the Olympic lifts, whether it's recreationally or not, that's a huge amount of exposure. That's more interest from media and sponsors and coaches and everything. And then we can start bringing up, finding that top tier talent from that pool.
So what do you get if you go to the internet today and you're a 12-year-old kid and you type in how to become a lifter?
You probably get a lot of conflicting information, but it's
how do you sort it out?
Well, and that's tough. It's without having a frame of reference, without having a background, it's tough to sort it out. But having any information, I think, is kind of better than none, even if it's not necessarily perfect. I would rather have gotten started in the sport with a terrible coach than having had to wait years to start it all. And so, being self-taught is very difficult. In my position, it was like, well, there was squat, bench, deadlift, press, snatch, clean and jerk. To me they were kind of all the same sort of thing because I wasn't really familiar with the sport itself. Everyone knows what powerlifting is because those lifts are they're ubiquitous. Every kid knows how to bench press, right? That's like the first barbell lift that every kid learns now. It used to be the press in the 50s and 60s. And so, until you're exposed to someone who says, hey, yeah, this is a sport, this is how you do it, let me help you get on your way, you're kind of stuck. So any information they get, I think, is at least a good start.
So let's put together two pieces of information digging into that. I've heard you say in the past that around 14 years old is the optimum time for someone to get into Olympic weightlifting. And something you've also said on, I think, your own podcast with Rob Wolf, where you talked about kids at a young age, 5, 6, 7, growing up, should be playing a lot of different sports, right?
Yeah.
Not specializing in anything. Walk us through, say, a parent who wants to get their kid involved in Olympic weightlifting, at least expose them to it, like you're saying, to build this broader base of participation. At what age should they start? How should they start them?
I think that, yeah, definitely, the younger you are, the more activities you should be involved in. I think that's a really key part of any kid's kind of athletic and even social and emotional development, right? Is in having experience in individual sports, having experience in team sports, and learning those different social skills and how to, interact with people and manage yourself, right? But physically speaking, when you start specializing kids at a super young age, you just end up with tons of problems. I mean, kids having Tommy John surgery when they're 13 years old is insane. These kids are freshmen in high school and they've already blown out their ACLs playing football or whatever it is. And having that breadth of experience of activity, I think, is a huge, it kind of inoculates you against a lot of those potential problems that come from early specialization. So with regard to weightlifting specifically, I think that as a kid who is playing multiple sports or doing multiple activities, that can be one part, right? That is one part of that general physical development. So they should be doing, gymnastics type movements. They should be doing, running and jumping based movements. And then basic barbell stuff. So, you're introducing them to the basic lifts, the squat, the deadlift, the bench, the press. And then, as they get into 9, 10, 11 or so, I think you can certainly introduce them to that snatch, clean and jerk. You're not going to push it really hard. That's a motor learning time, right? At that point, pre-pubescence, you're not going to get a lot of strength and muscle growth, obviously, because they just don't have the hormonal situation to handle it or to produce it. But that's that motor learning opportunity. It's like learning a language. When you're 5 years old, you can learn languages very quickly, right? Once you're 30, you're too stupid, right? It takes forever. It's the same thing with this stuff, right? You have a kid who did gymnastics for 5 weeks versus a kid who played video games, and that 5 weeks alone, you will see those kids pick up any sport so much faster than their peers. And so you're in such a, you're so primed for that learning at that point that you want to take the opportunity and introduce these kids to something like that and have it be just one part at least of that overall development.
Any difference between boys and girls in what time they should pick it up, given their different development cycles?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that there needs to be that much of a difference. I think that obviously boys tend to mature physically later and emotionally never. But I don't think with that early stage it's going to matter a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. And so let's move into the film now, American Weightlifting, the film. So just give us kind of the 10-second overview on why you made it. You took 4 years making it. Why?
I wanted to make it because I knew no one else would. There weren't any movie studios banging down on our doors to make a movie about the sport, and so it's for a number of different reasons. One, I really felt like the sport needed to be celebrated. We needed to really bring some attention to it and recognize a lot of these coaches. Like a few of them I interviewed: Mike Bergner, John Thrush, Jim Schmitz, Bob Takano. These guys who have been involved in one way or another for decades and have really been, among others, the force that has kept the sport going and made it possible for people like me to even get involved. And these are the guys who are complete non-self promoters, right? Most people out of the small weightlifting community have never heard of John Thrush. But the guy has had a huge influence. He's produced so many top-level athletes. But he'll never tell you that. He'll never go on the internet and say, hey, look what I've done, right? He just kind of hangs out, coaches athletes, and then people like me have to be like, look. And so, I wanted to recognize them and celebrate that. And then I also, of course, wanted to put something together that would have at least the potential to reach out to people outside the community and get them interested or make them aware that the sport existed. And obviously, a technical book about weightlifting is not going to be that medium. No one's going to go to the library and be looking for a novel and say, oh man, I should pick up this 450-page textbook on weightlifting. This looks fascinating, right? But a movie is probably the most palatable, universally speaking, kind of medium for people to get interested in something. So I thought, why not?
Is it geared towards people who have no exposure to the sport at all, or do you need sort of a knowledge, a general exposure to some of the aspects of it?
I did try to make it accessible to people who have no experience or knowledge of the sport. Now that being said, it's probably going to appeal most to people who have already some knowledge of the weightlifting world or who are involved in some way in a similar sport. Like throwers are probably going to like it more than, say, like a golfer. Mm-hmm. But it's tough, right? Because you have two totally different audiences that you want to please. I wanted to really make sure that the weightlifting community saw it and it could appreciate it. And but of course, they already know about weightlifting. I don't need to convince them to like weightlifting. And so, how do you balance that with trying to make it interesting and accessible to people with no experience? And so that was obviously a really difficult part. And so I'm hoping that I did a good enough job with that people will find it interesting enough to at least kind of take a look and slog through 2 hours of weightlifting movie and tell the friends.
And for the people who are really experienced, like the Bob Tucanos of the world, the Mike Bergners of the world, the folks you interviewed as part of this, if we asked them along the way during their career how optimistic they were about things, because like you said, there were some bleak years along the way, bleak times, where would they place this? We already talked about your view of where things are today.
I think that generally, and this is based on conversations I've had with these guys and others like them, that they would probably agree with me that it is picking up a bit. Now, is it, in 5 years, are we going to be dominating Russia and China? No. We have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of changes that need to be made, and we're never going to have comparable systems to countries like that because we just have too many other avenues for athletes. We have too many other sports with money drawing them away. And, people on the internet, they love attacking this reason, right? Well, people will say, well, weightlifting in the U.S. isn't good because of the NFL. It's like, well, what about the 77-kilo guys? They're not in the NFL. It's like, yeah, no shit. But you know what? They were probably playing football or wrestling or doing track and field or something in high school. They had opportunities to get girls or guys. They had opportunities to get college scholarships. And no matter what, there's always that idea that, hey, if I'm good enough, I can get paid millions of dollars. Jim Schmidt said it in the movie Best, I think, when he said, in a lot of these countries, weightlifting is a meal ticket, right? We in the U.S. give up what they gain by being weightlifters. So to be a weightlifter in this country, you give up going to college. You give up having a good career, right? You're basically promised a life of poverty and obscurity.
Versus, could be a monk.
Yeah, versus being in, say, China, where you're going to be supported financially. You have the potential. You come out the other end of their program with basically a college degree in weightlifting. You have opportunities to work in that system as a coach, as whoever. Someone was telling me at one of the regional centers they've got an Olympic gold medalist who's doing lights out checks for the 14-year-old kids, and it's like you're guaranteed to have something to do. And so you can't look at that and be surprised that we can't get as many people going into that sport as a country like China can.
Now, do you see an opportunity there, given the rise of Title IX in this country, increasing female participation in sports, although in some cases it's being chiseled back, because of budget cuts?
Yeah.
Do you see an opportunity there for female lifters as opposed to male lifters? Because many of the sports you mentioned, things like football, big power sports, baseball,
Sure.
volleyball, things like that. Do you see an opportunity for female lifters?
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity, and the interesting thing is that I haven't done the actual numbers on this, but I feel like weightlifting, especially now, is bringing in more females than males. When you go, the American Open is coming up here in 5 weeks or so, and 48 kilo women. That's a tiny gal, right? Not a lot of those people in the world. We have something like 18 of them already registered for the American Open. And so, the 56 kilo men, which is the equivalent class for men, not even half that, right? So there's definitely, I think, a big draw for women, and even women who have been athletes in other sports, right? So, look at gymnastics, and when does a female peak in gymnastics, right? They're young.
15?
They retire when they get to...
Technical difficulties over. So, Greg, in the 4 years you were making the film, what surprised you? What did you learn the most? Either shattered some preconceived notions or changed your view of things?
I think that I definitely went into it believing that the situation was a little more bleak than it turned out to be. I think I was very encouraged by the interactions I had, and even seeing over that period of 4 years, seeing the growth that the sport has undergone in such a short period of time was obviously pretty encouraging, and has made me a lot more optimistic. So, but the underlying issue was that every coach I talked to had an incredible amount of passion for the sport, and has proven their dedication sometimes for decades. And so the way I looked at it was that as long as there are still even a handful of those people, there's always that potential for us to continue growing.
And how have those coaches then created that sort of outsized influence with everyone else that they influence, either lifters or other coaches who come out of their laboratories?
I think it starts with being the kind of person that others admire and just naturally want to emulate. So if you're the kind of person that is not just a good coach in the technical sense, you produce good athletes, but the kind of coach who is just generally a good human being, I think obviously that's very appealing to people. And anyone who has any interest in going into that sort of field, whether professionally or in more of a volunteer sort of situation, is going to aspire to be like that. And so that's the number one, right? These people just inspire others to live up to that high standard they've set. And part of it too is I believe that a lot of these people just by nature are more teachers than others. And so some people are very much they're more interested in impressing people with their knowledge rather than teaching people their knowledge. And I think that the coach that I came up with, Mike Bergner, was very much a teacher and very much kind of a father figure in a sense, and fostered this environment in his gym that encouraged. He encouraged me to become a good coach. It really was an apprenticeship, and that's how all the best craftsmen in the world have always learned, right? Is through apprenticeship. They didn't do weekend seminars or read things online. It was you sat side by side and worked with these master craftsmen, and they taught you how they did things, and then you split off and kind of developed and evolved on your own. And so I think that this handful of coaches that I included in the movie were all really good examples of that. They have all inspired kind of a legacy of coaches and lifters who have wanted to go out and bring the sport to more people. And whether or not they do things exactly the same as their original coaches did is kind of irrelevant. It's more that push to do it at all that really matters.
And how do you, when you're creating that kind of laboratory here, gym as a laboratory, how do you instill that in your other coaches? And how do you also make sure you keep, how do you set the tone of here's how we do things around here? Jackass is not welcome, for example. Because you get that sometimes with great athletes.
You do. It's unfortunate. A lot of the best athletes physically are the worst people in the world. And, you see that in professional sports a lot. People tolerate a lot of shitty behavior for the sake of exploiting those athletic talents. But, I think largely it's setting an example, right? I set an example of what I expect, how I expect things to work by every single thing I do, right? People are always going to kind of look to that lead person, that coach, whoever it is, to set that example, and they're going to model their behavior after you largely. And so if we have a terrible atmosphere in here, and I've got a bunch of athletes who are undisciplined and lazy and obnoxious and rude, then it's probably my own fault. But part of it too is that team environment. I need the help of my team to help teach new lifters how they need to behave and what they need to do in training, because I can't micromanage every single thing. I've got I think 13 lifters at the national level at this point. I write individual programs for all of them, and I can't watch every single thing they do every single day. And so it's like you teach that core originally, that I started with, and then as new people have come on, that those few people have kind of helped me instill in the new people the behavior that we kind of expect. And I would much rather have someone who is not incredibly gifted physically, but who is an extremely hard worker and who is disciplined and who is supportive. And we have basically gotten rid of people who were very good athletes, but who just were not people that I wanted here.
And how would, we covered the coaching end, but how would an athlete who wants to become a good Olympic lifter, or even just try their hand in Olympic weightlifting, what are some advice for the aspiring lifter?
Best advice I can give you is find a coach. And that's easier to do these days than it was, even in recent years. But I realize that's still not a possibility for everybody. So that aside, you really have to interact with other people in the sport one way or another. You don't want to be totally isolated. Even if you're training by yourself in your garage, get online, get involved in some kind of weightlifting forum at least. Read the articles, post comments, interact with people, and share your training with people. Like I have a friend in San Diego, and we're constantly talking about our training. So we don't train together day to day. We train together, maybe twice a year. But we always kind of know what's going on with each other. And, that little bit of interaction, I think you really can't underestimate the power of that. And so find a coach. If you can't find a coach, do your best to find the learning resources online. Obviously, there's books, DVDs, free articles, videos. There's a million things out there. Some are fantastic, some are awful, some are right in between. So the balance of them is going to be, it's a net good amount of information, right? And then find someone or a group of people to interact with in one way or another to kind of help keep you on track and help keep you engaged as much as possible. To
get a viewing party together to watch American Weightlifting, the movie.
Sure, why not?
So while we're on the topic, how can people watch the movie? How can they access it?
AmericanWeightliftingFilm.com is the center of the movie universe there, so they can access all the links. It'll be available on DVD for download and streaming. So everything's kind of linked from there.
On what date?
November 16th. The theater premiere is sold out, just sold out this morning.
Congratulations.
So that'll be fun, but that's November 16th also, so that'll be the day when all this stuff is out. So you can pre-order the download DVD now, and then as soon as the 16th hits, that stuff will go out automatically, and you can watch that anywhere in the world.
And you have a discount code for Tabata Times listeners, don't you?
Yep, Tabata Times, one word, no space, all lowercase, and that'll give you $5 off. So that's only $10 for a download.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's the download, to be clear, not the DVD.
Of course, yeah. And so one thing, I've seen the shirts you have, support your local weightlifter. How can people support their local weightlifter? They watch the movie and then they want to say, there's an aspiring young lifter in my community. How can I support them?
Pretty much, anything you can do is going to be great. So, find out when they're competing. Go watch them compete. Cheer them on. Volunteer to help out at a meet. Those are things you can do for free. It don't cost you anything. A lot of lifters who are kind of aspiring to get to that national level or international level often you'll be able to kind of donate money to them. $5. That's a lunch for one of these guys, right? And when they're struggling to afford to travel to a meet, buy supplements, all these things, that $5 goes a long way. So anything you can do in that sense, and then go if they're putting out videos or doing anything online, watch that stuff, share it, and show them that people are actually interested in what they're doing and they support them. So you don't have to be some millionaire benefactor, adopting a weightlifter and taking on all their financial obligations, but you can really show your support in a lot of ways. And I think money aside, that stuff goes a long way.
And then one last serious question before we get into fun ones at the end. A lot of times there are questions around drugs in the sport, right? What's your thoughts on drugs in the sport, both in the States and internationally? Because it's something we hear oftentimes from people.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate issue to even have to deal with. The reality is that it is a very big thing internationally, and we see this in pretty much every sport. People tend to look at the power and strength sports and expect those to be kind of the centers of the PED use world. But you look at something like cycling. Cycling has long been probably the dirtiest sport out there. So it's something that happens because there is a constant push for people to get better, to beat each other, and there's a constant expectation of spectators or by spectators for these guys to put out these incredible performances. And so I don't necessarily have some big moral or ethical objection to drugs, but the bottom line is that they're illegal in all of these sports, and so we have to keep pushing to try to get a level playing field. Now, that being said, none of us are ever going to genuinely know what is happening anywhere outside of our own gyms, our own countries. I know for a fact that in the U.S., every lifter is subject to drug testing. You go to any national meet, and they're going to test the medalists, and they're also going to test randomly. So you could finish dead last, and there's still a chance that you will get tested. Now, does that mean it's absolutely...
Didn't help you much.
Yeah. Does it mean it's absolutely impossible to use drugs in the U.S.? No, it's not. But we tend to... U.S. Lifters tend to get caught a lot more than lifters elsewhere who may not have... A lot of these other countries don't have the same... There isn't a social stigma attached to these drugs. It's part and parcel with these sports. And the difference between them a lot of times is that here, they're not just illegal in the sport, they are illegal for use and possession, period. Whereas, you go to a lot of places and you buy this stuff over the counter. There just isn't that stigma attached to it. And so there isn't this weird cultural, moral objection attached to it. And, there have been many, many cases of foreign coaches coming to the U.S. and basically looking around and saying, you guys aren't really doing anything differently than what we are. You just are terrible at recruiting, you have no long-term development, and you don't take the medicine. You know what I mean? There aren't... I really think that a lot of people believe there are these crazy, Eastern European or Asian secret training methods, and there's really not a lot of secrets out there. It's just, the situations are so very different, and the systems that are in place are very much geared towards producing good weightlifters in some places, whereas here we don't have a system at all. And so you can say that yes, a lot of these guys are on drugs, and I would say that yeah, a lot of international competitors at the top are on drugs, and we see it. We've had entire teams test positive. The Greeks, the Bulgarians, the Turks, 15 lifters testing positive together. You can't look at that and say, well, it's only this, this handful of people internationally who are doping. That's just nonsense. But I don't think that's not the reason we're not up there in competition. It's part of it, but there are many, many more things that we need to take care of that will propel us up in those rankings that are more important than the disparity in drug use.
Okay, so great interview. 2 quick questions at the end, fun questions we like to play around with. Person you would most like to interview, alive or dead?
Wow.
Could have been for your movie, or could it just be in general?
I don't know. Since we're on the topic of weightlifting, I would probably say Zlatan Vanev, who is a Bulgarian weightlifter, and he's now coaching for Azerbaijan. So,
And why? So for our audience who's not.
He's always been my favorite lifter,
Mm-hmm.
and he always had. I don't know him. I've never spoken to him, so maybe he's a horrible person. I assume he's not, but he always had. He struck me as someone who was just the epitome of this really fierce commitment to succeeding. Right? He was always. You watch him lift, and you say, "That's how I want every single one of my weightlifters to train and to compete." And so he was just this like shining example of weightlifting to me.
And last question, what's your last meal on earth? If the world's ending tomorrow, what are you picking?
I don't know, I'm definitely washing it down with a Diet Coke, but it would be some kind of nacho variant, and that could be anywhere from your traditional nachos to possibly a pile of French fries with carne asada and stuff on them. I don't know.
Okay.
I'd have to see how I felt at that moment.
Interesting. Not like chocolate peanut butter. You're going pure savory.
I'm not a big sweet sugar kind of guy.
Okay.
Diet Coke is about as close as I get to that.
Who's got the best French fries?
Definitely not In-N-Out. I don't know what people are thinking when they say that. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I'm a pretty flexible guy.
Got any French fry sponsors we should be plugging right now?
I wish. I wish we had a French fry sponsor. We will take French fry
sponsorship opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, and on that note, thanks very much, Greg. AmericanWeightliftingFilm.com is the website, and Tabata Times discount code for the streaming part of it. Thanks very much to Greg and Catalyst Athletics for having us here.
Thank you.